Chapter 12. Oscar lands in prison. Oscar stayed up in the mountain pastures for another day. He went out into the meadows with the cows, and he had jumping competitions with the goats over stones and ditches. Then he helped the herdsman to look for a kid that had climbed far up the mountain all on its own and had been lost among the rocks. In the end, Oscar found it. "I think you would make a good herd dog," Alex praised him. When they got home again with the kid, "Won't you stay with us? In the autumn we shall be going down to the valley, and you can go home then." "Yes, do stay here a little while longer," Lisa said. "It's such fun listening to your stories about the burglar and the cleaner." Oscar could never drink enough of the lovely creamy milk, and he even found the cheese delicious up here, although he did not like it at home. All the same, he knew that he could not stay any longer. "I've had a good rest now," he said. "It's time for me to return home. My young master must think I'm dead, or that I've been stolen. Tomorrow morning I'll go back to Upchurch to ask about my collar at the station." The next morning he said goodbye to Alex and Lisa and the other cows, and ran gaily off down the mountain path. Long before lunchtime he reached the meadows, where the sheep were grazing. "Did you find your cow?" they called out as soon as they saw the dachshund coming down the path. "You must stop and tell us what you have been doing in the mountain pastures. You promised." Oscar sat down beside the sheep and told them the whole story, why he had gone up to the pastures, and what had happened to him there, and what he was going to do next. The sheep listened attentively, and every time something amused them, they laughed out loud, "Ma! Ah!" When Oscar got to the part when the eagle picked him up and carried him off, the little lambs began crying and said, "Oh, that eagle! Our mothers always tell us we mustn't run away very far, or the eagle will eat us, and once he really did come and get one of us." The eldest sheep had only nodded her head to everything that she heard. Now she cleared her throat and remarked, "The reason why you didn't know when you were lost your collar was that you had no little bell on it. If you have a bell on your collar, then you notice at once if it stops tinkling. Look at the ones we have." She shook her head and made her bell ring loudly. "Yes, dogs ought to have bells on their collars too," the other sheep said, nodding their heads wisely. Oscar listened to this idea and then said, "You are a clever old sheep, and you talk like a sheep. A dachshund could not wear a bell, or else the rats and mice would hear him coming by the tinkling, and then how could he hunt rats and mice?" "You are right there," answered the sheep. "Then you will just have to see if you can find your collar again. We wish you lots of luck." Oscar drank a little water from a stream and went on his way. Soon he reached the village of Upchurch, and he made straight for the station. It was lunchtime, and Oscar was feeling very hungry. "I could just go to the hotel first and see if the cook will give me something to eat," he said. Maybe I shall be allowed to sit at the big table again, with the rich gentleman and the lady and the 2 children." He was just about to turn off for the hotel when he changed his mind again. "I've got the rest of the day to eat in," he thought. "First, I will see where my collar is. It's probably somewhere at the station, in the lost property office," Alex said. "I must take care, though, not to run right into the hands of the station master or the guard." He prowled warily all round the station, but he did not meet a soul. In one corner he saw a big bucket. "That must be the cleaner's bucket," Oscar thought. "If she were here now, she would get the collar out for me all right. Or at least she would be able to tell me where it is." Then he came to a door that was open a crack. Could someone be inside? Oscar pushed the door a little farther open and put his head round it. Nobody was in sight. Then he went in and looked round the room. There was a tall stand against one wall with dozens of articles of all sorts on it. There were cases, hats, bags, dishes, bottles, gloves, tobacco pipes, spectacles, a bird cage, and packages and parcels of all shapes and colors. There was a rack full of umbrellas and walking sticks, and in one corner there even hung a gun, which had been lost by some huntsman, or possibly a soldier. There was no doubt about it. This was the lost property office. Oscar looked and looked at all the things. There were balls that children had left behind in the carriages, a mouth organ, and a red Indian tomahawk. From the very top of the stand a stuffed owl looked down at the dachshund, out of glass eyes. Oscar ran to and fro and sniffed and snuffed. Then he suddenly stopped and looked up at the stand again. However, he possibly missed that before. There, on a little hook, hung a red collar with golden studs. Oscar leapt up and down with joy, and felt that he must burst out barking. There was his collar. At last he had found his collar again. "How marvelous!" cried Oscar. "Now it won't be long before I can go back to my Master Willie again. How pleased he will be to have me home again, especially if I bring my lovely collar too." Who was going to get the collar down from the stand for him? Oscar asked himself. There was nobody around. Perhaps people are meant to help themselves to what belongs to them in the lost property office, he thought, and that's why they left the door open. Then I shall just have to get the collar down myself. He tried pushing a chair up from the window, but it was too heavy for him. He went back to the stand again. It's not really all that high, he thought. Maybe I can jump up and pull the collar off the hook. He crouched down, ready to spring, then leaped up, got a foothold on the bottom shelf, and snapped at the collar. What happened next, Oscar never did understand. He suddenly felt the stand beginning to wobble. He tried to hold on, but then he fell over backwards onto the ground, and the whole stand with all the lovely things on it came down on top of him with a tremendous clatter. Oscar shrieked at the top of his voice with fright. Then all was quiet. Thank goodness he had not broken any bones, and with a great effort he burrowed his way out of the pile that had buried him. Then he heard quick footsteps, and a voice shouted, "What's going on? What's all that row about?" The next moment somebody seized him by the scruff of his neck. A strong hand shook him, and the voice went on. "What do you mean by breaking in here? This really is the last straw. You wait, you little thief. I'll teach you a lesson." Oscar was so frightened that at first he could not say a word. He squinted round at the man and saw that it was the station master. Yes, he had a big red cap on his head. Mr. Station Master, sir," he stammered. "I'm not a thief. Really, I'm not. That's my collar there." The man did not listen. He grasped Oscar even more firmly and carried him out of the door and along a passage. Then they went down a dark staircase to the cellar. The man unlocked a door and flung Oscar far inside. "You can think it over in there, you thieving hound," he shouted, and before Oscar could even get to his feet again, he had slammed the door and turned the key. There stood Oscar. It was pitch dark, but even without any light he could tell by the smell where the station master had locked him up. It was the coal cellar. Oscar sat down miserably on the cold floor. "What will he do with me now?" he thought. "Why did that silly stand have to fall over? I didn't give it such a hard push as all that. Perhaps they will never let me out again, and I shall starve to death in here." Oscar did not know how long he sat there. Suddenly everything sprang to life overhead in the station. He heard footsteps and loud shouting. Then came a rumbling and a roaring that made the very floor shake. Oscar was terrified. "The house is falling in," he cried desperately. It was no use scratching at the door. Nobody came to let him out. Gradually the rumbling stopped. Then it occurred to Oscar that it must have been the train. Of course, a train must have arrived. The station master would not have time now to bother with a dachshund. Oscar had grown used to the darkness by now, and he could see two tiny chinks of light by the door. He sat close to the chinks and listened. Nobody came down to the cellar. Hour after hour passed. All grew quiet up in the station. Slowly the chinks of light faded away. Night had fallen. Then Oscar began to bark loudly. He was hungry, and besides, there was something he simply must do, which one wasn't supposed to do indoors. But call as he would, no one came. He had been completely forgotten. "Willie, my master, Willie," cried Oscar, "where are you? Come and help me." The tears ran down his cheeks and dripped onto the cold floor. Oscar awoke with a start. He had to think for a moment before he knew where he was. Oh yes, in the dark coal cellar. Without realizing it, he had fallen asleep. Now the door was opening, and he could see it was light again outside. "Where's that dog?" shouted a voice. It was the station master. Oscar leapt up. Maybe he could get away. Then the man turned on the light, and for a moment Oscar could not see a thing. He was quite dazzled by the sudden glare. The man grabbed him at once and pushed him into a sack. "There, my fine fellow," he said. "Now you will see what happens to thieves like you." Oscar did not try to wriggle. It would not have done any good. He felt himself being put into a hand cart, and then off they went, out of the station and along the roads of Upchurch. Oscar's heart almost stopped beating. He was so frightened. What was the man going to do with him? Perhaps he would throw him and the sack straight into a river or a pond. He would be drowned helplessly. Or would he be made into roast dog? After a while the cart stopped. Someone dragged the sack into a house and dropped it on the floor. "The thief's in there," said the station master, and another voice answered, "Well then, let's have a look." The sack was pulled open, and Oscar crawled slowly out. He blinked in the bright light, and how astonished he was when he saw the second man. It was the Upchurch policeman, the one who had helped him to catch the two bad burglars. Oscar and the policeman looked at each other, and at first neither of them could say a word. Then Oscar jumped up at the policeman and began barking with joy. "What sort of a joke is this supposed to be?" cried the police sergeant. "This is our old friend Oscar." Now it was the station master's turn to be surprised. At last he started to protest. A funny sort of friend, this Dachshund. He sneaked into the lost property office and overturned the whole stand. He must have intended to steal the lot. "Steady, steady, everything in the right order," said the sergeant. "Well, Oscar, how was that?" "It was like this," began Oscar. "I was in the mountain pastures, and there my friend Lisa and the herdsman told me that my collar would be here in the station, that is, in the lost property office. So I came here yesterday and looked for it at the station. No one was about, but there was a door open. I went in there and saw the collar. I was trying to get it down when the whole stand fell over and nearly killed me. And then this man came and scolded me and threw me in the coal cellar." "Then you spent the whole night in the dark coal cellar?" asked the policeman. "And what did you have to eat?" "I didn't have anything," said Oscar quietly. "I was locked in all the time." At that the policeman looked very serious. "I can understand someone getting a bit cross at times," he said to the station master, "but locking a dog in a cold cellar without food and drink for a day and a night, no, that won't do at all. The next time there'll be a fat fine to pay. Now give the Dachshund whatever he likes to eat, and then please fetch his collar for him immediately." The station master had gone quite pale. I thought he was a thief," he said, and the collar is not here any longer. I put everything into a packing case yesterday and sent it to the city. You know that everything we find in the trains is sent down to the big city if nobody comes and claims it here. Yesterday the case went off on the evening train. The collar was in it too." The collar had gone again. Tears ran down Oscar's cheeks. What could he do now? "Don't look so unhappy," said the policeman. "We'll simply write to the city and ask them to send it back to Upchurch, even if they have to spend a long time looking for it. It will be back here within a week." "My collar's in the big city now." "Is it? In the lost property office?" sobbed Oscar. "No, then I can't wait here. I want to go there and get it myself." Who knows what else might happen to it? Won't you have something to eat here at any rate? Asked the policeman, but Oscar had no wish to stay any longer in Upchurch. No, thank you, he said. I must go to the big city at once and find the lost property office. If I stay any longer, I won't ever find my collar again. Goodbye. Then Oscar was off and away down the road. Chapter 13. Off to the big city. There was Oscar on the road again. I got out of that dark cellar all right, he thought. Now I'm sure I shall find the big city too. That's where the collar is now. The station master sent it there, to the big lost property office. Oscar made his way back to the station. I'd better take the train. That will get me to the city the soonest, he thought. Perhaps I shall see the children who were so nice to me in the railway carriage. When he got to the station, there was not a train to be seen. Perhaps there aren't any more trains running today, thought Oscar, and perhaps it isn't so very far to the big city. I'll try and see if I can walk there. He went out of the station again, and followed the road which ran down the valley between the railway and the Upchurch brook. He had not gone very far before he met a farmer, leading a calf behind him. "Good morning, Mr. Farmer," said Oscar. "This is the way to the big city, isn't it?" "Yes, it is, Dashhound," answered the farmer. "You have a pretty long way to go. Good journey to you." "It won't be all that bad," said Oscar, and went on. He had been on the road about an hour when he saw a boy in the distance, driving 2 pigs in front of him. The boy was kept very busy, hurrying after the animals, for they would not stay on the road. They ran off into the fields to eat and grunt contentedly, first to the right and then to the left. As he watched them, Oscar realized how hungry he was. There was not one anywhere near who could give him anything to eat. "Oh, if only I'd done as the policeman said," he told himself. "I should have had something to eat in Upchurch." Now it was too late for that. He went up to the pig boy and said, "I've a very long way to go to the big city, and I've had nothing to eat all day. I suppose you haven't got anything in your pocket that you could give me." The boy looked all through his pockets, but he could not find a single crumb. "If only you'd come a bit sooner," he said. "I've only just eaten my last bit of bread, and I gave the pigs a bit too, so that they wouldn't keep on running away. If you would like to come with me, though, we live up there, 2 hours' walk up the mountain side." No, Oscar could not walk as far as that, with such an empty tummy. He lay down on the grass beside the road and began to cry. "Oh, I wish I were a pig too. Then I could eat grass and green stuff to my heart's content. Then I wouldn't feel so hungry." "You must be quite mad," said the pigs. "Whoever would want to be a pig? We eat and eat to grow big and fat, and then we are made into sausages and bacon. No, you dogs are much better off." "You are probably right," said Oscar. "It doesn't do to give up just because you're hungry." He stood up and went on again. The sun was high in the sky, and it burned down on the little dachshund. The stones on the road were so hot that you could have fried eggs on them. It must be lunch time by now. This is the time when Willie's mother calls out that lunch is ready, thought Oscar, and in the mountain pastures the herdsman is in his hut with his milk and bread and cheese, and in the hotel the people are sitting at the tables in the dining room, and cook is filling up all the bowls and plates with good things. All at once Oscar noticed that he was not seeing the road properly. Everything suddenly went green, and then it went red, and the fences and trees began to dance about before his eyes. "I hope I'm not going to faint with hunger and heat," he thought anxiously. "I must get to the big city today." But now everything looked black to him, as if it were the middle of the night. He couldn't go on. At length he fell over on the road and lay still, with all four legs stretched out in front of him. How long had he lain there? Oscar did not know himself. Suddenly he jumped with fright. A motor car hooted and its brakes screeched wildly as it pulled up just short of Oscar. "Whatever's that?" cried a man. "There's a dog asleep in the middle of the road. Or is it dead? Yes, I think it's dead. Come on, Bobby, let's drive on." "Oh, do help me," whimpered Oscar. "I'm not dead yet." He tried to stand up, but the doors of the car were slammed shut, and the motor began to purr again. Suddenly a boy's voice rang out. "Daddy, he's still alive." He opened his eyes. The motor stopped again, and the boy came running across to Oscar. "It's Oscar," he shouted. "This is Oscar, who caught the burglar." Then the whole family climbed out of the car, and they all bent down around the dachshund. The rich gentleman and his wife, and the two children. "Oscar, what's wrong with you?" asked the gentleman. "I thought you had gone to the mountain pastures to ask about your collar. How did you get here? We nearly ran you over." Oscar flapped his mouth open and shut, but he could not say a word. "Go and get some water," said the lady. "He must be dying of thirst, or else he's got sunstroke. Anyway, water will do him good." The boy fetched a dish and a bottle out of the car, and Oscar lapped up the whole dishful of water. "Oh, thank you," he panted. "I was going to the big city, and then I fell down." "To the big city? But that's much too far," cried the rich gentleman. "You can't walk all the way there, especially not in this heat. We are just going to the big city ourselves, and then on a little farther. If you like, you can come with us." Oscar was only too glad to accept. They lifted him carefully into the car and laid him down on the back seat between the boy and the girl. Then the car drove on again. "There now, have a good sleep," said the boy. "When we get to the big city, I'll wake you up. I promise I won't forget." Oscar sat up at this. "No, thank you, I've slept long enough," he said. "But I'm so hungry, and I could drink another bowlful of water straight off." The kind lady handed a basket over to the back, and Oscar was told to choose what he liked from it. There were rolls with ham, salami, liver sausage, and cold roast beef inside, and there was a box full of cakes. "It's not a question of where I begin," said Oscar. "I haven't had anything to eat since yesterday morning. If I may, I shall eat up the whole lot." Everyone laughed. "What a good thing we found you," said the little girl. "Otherwise you would have been run over by a lorry or a tractor, or you might have starved to death." Oscar ate and ate, and the more he ate the good things, the better he began to feel. At last he told them all about his adventures on the way to the mountain pastures, and how he had found his collar at the station in the lost property office. When he went on to tell how the whole stand had toppled down on his head, stuffed owl and all, the little boy laughed so hard that he spluttered and choked. "You know," said his mother, "it's all very well for you to laugh like a mad thing, but it wasn't a laughing matter for the poor dachshund." "Why are you going to the big city?" asked the rich gentleman. "Do you know someone there, or have you relations? And where is your collar now?" "That's what is in the big city," answered Oscar. "The station master sent it there because nobody came to claim it from him. I'm going to get it from the lost property office in the big city." The car drove through one village after another without a stop. Oscar and the children all looked out of the back window of the car and counted the villages they passed and the bridges they crossed. "7 towers," the boy read out from a sign by the side of the road. "7 towers," cried Oscar in excitement. "Are we coming to 7 towers? That's where my home is." "Wouldn't you rather get out here and go to your master, Willie?" asked the rich gentleman. "No, no," cried Oscar. "I've got to find my collar first, and I'll be back again tomorrow. What would my master say if I came back without the collar?" "As you think best," said the gentleman kindly. "On we go then." The car drove past the little town, and on through fields and woods. It was evening by the time they reached the big city at last. "I'll just take you to the lost property office," said the rich gentleman. "Then we must drive on. We are in rather a hurry. The children's grandmother has fallen ill and is expecting us. Otherwise, we should have been staying much longer in Upchurch." The car drew up outside a large building. The boy looked out of the window at the big notice above the door. "Lost Property Office," he spelt out. "Then we've come to the right place," said the gentleman. "There is the Lost Property Office. Now we must leave you with our best wishes, my dear Oscar." The boy and the girl cried when they had to say goodbye to the little dachshund. "We'll meet again one day," Oscar consoled them. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you very much, too," said the gentleman and the lady. "If you had not found the burglars in the hotel, they would have stolen everything from us." They climbed back into the car and drove off. Oscar watched until they had disappeared round a corner of the street. Chapter 14. Oscar finds a new friend. It was in this big building that he would find the collar he had been looking for so long. Oscar ran up the steps and went into the building. No one was in sight. There were doors all along both sides of a long passageway, and each door had a little plate on it with a number. I'd better begin with number 1, thought Oscar, scratching at the first door. There was no reply. He jumped up at the door handle and tugged at it. Suddenly the door opened, and there before him stood a very tall policeman. He had a rubber truncheon hanging from one side of his belt, and a whistle from the other. "Good evening," said Oscar. "Excuse me, please, is this the Lost Property Office?" "This is the police station," answered the tall policeman. "The Lost Property Office is over there, on the other side." He took a long look at the dachshund, and his face grew grave. "How did you get here in the first place?" he asked. "Have you run away from your master? Who do you belong to?" "My name is Oscar, and my master is called Willie," the dachshund answered in a small voice. "I come from Seven Towers. I lost my collar there. I went to Upchurch looking for it. There I was told that they had sent it to the Lost Property Office in the big city. Now I've come to get it. Goodbye." "Good luck to you, Oscar," said the tall policeman, "and mind you don't get lost in the big city." Oscar ran over to the door the tall policeman had shown him and went in. A man with a big pair of black spectacles was standing behind a little window. "Good evening," said Oscar. "I'd like to collect my collar." "Collect your collar," said the man. "Well, you will have to come with your master." Oscar was not to be put off. "My master is at school, and he doesn't live here," he replied, "but I can tell you myself exactly what the collar is like. It's made of red leather, and has lots of golden studs. The station master at Upchurch sent it here. I will go and see whether we have a collar like that," said the man, and disappeared behind a high wooden partition. "Of course it's there," said Oscar. He could hardly wait for the man to come back. He heard him opening one drawer after another behind the partition, and then shutting them again and muttering to himself. Then he came back to the little window, but instead of the collar he was holding a big book. "Yes, we have had a collar like that here," he said. "I thought as much. Only this afternoon a man came and said it belonged to him. His white palm had lost it, he said, or had it stolen. So I gave it to him. Yes, it was a white palm. I had a good look at it, because it barked the whole time it was here." "Where is the man?" cried Oscar in dismay. "Where did he go?" The man with the spectacles shut the book and said, "That I can't tell you." Oscar began sobbing and crying. His collar was gone again. "How can I find the man with the white palm?" he sobbed. "Even if I do find him, he won't give me the collar back. Yes, now it was lost for good." "I'm very sorry I gave your collar to the wrong person," said the man, "but I'm afraid it can't be helped. What is gone. Now your master will have to buy you a new collar." "My master hasn't any more money," said Oscar. "He spent the whole of his savings on the collar. No, I can't go back to him without my collar." "You must go now," said the man, and began to lock up the cupboards. "It is 6 o'clock and closing time. Oscar trotted sadly out of the lost property office into the street. Who can help me now? Oscar asked himself. Who can tell me what I ought to do? Oscar did not know anybody in the big city. He wandered helplessly along between the tall houses, not knowing whatever would become of him. Oscar had not been walking very long before he came to a park with tall trees and wide flower beds and lawns. Under the trees stood some seats painted green. There were a great many people sitting on the seats, both young and old. Even a few children were still playing there, although it was quite late in the evening. An old man with a long white beard was sitting all alone on one of the seats. He had closed his eyes as if he were asleep. Beside him stood a box with 4 wheels underneath it. Very quietly Oscar jumped up on the seat and sat beside the man. Oh, if only I were as old as this man, he sighed out loud. Then I wouldn't have such a long time left to live, and my misery would soon be over. The old man opened his eyes at this. Whoever is that sounding so mournful? He asked, looking sideways at Oscar. Look at this now, a little dachshund, young and in perfect health, and making such a lamentation, as if he had been abandoned by the whole world. I really have been abandoned by everyone, said Oscar. I lost my collar, and just now I thought I had found it again, at last, and then they said someone else had come and taken it from the lost property office this afternoon, and it isn't his at all. He told the old man how it had all come about, and how he had tried so hard to find the lost collar again. Now the collar is gone forever, and I shall never get back to my Master Willie. Never, never. Oscar finished his sad story and began to cry bitterly. The old man took him onto his lap, pulled out a big red handkerchief, and dried his tears with it. Stop crying, he said. It's not as bad as all that. It must have been a specially beautiful collar that your master gave you, but what can he buy once he will be able to get again? Maybe the white palm will cross your path tomorrow, and you can take the collar away from him. I will help you in any way I can, and take note of this. For the rest of your life, my dear Oscar, you may lose everything else, but never lose your courage. Oscar's heart began to feel much lighter. Thank you, you kind old man, he said. What do you think? Should I go at once and start looking for the white palm? No, it's too late for that today. The palm won't be out in the streets any longer, answered the old man. But maybe you could help me a little with my work. Would you? Unhappy thoughts are soonest forgotten if one does some work. What sort of work do you do? Asked Oscar, sitting up. Does this funny box belong to you? That isn't a funny box, said the old man. It's a barrel organ. You see, I am a barrel organ grinder. I stand by the side of the road or in a square and make music, and then people give me a penny or two. Sometimes they don't give me anything at all, or they even chase me away. One must just take it as it comes. How do you make music, though? Asked Oscar. Do you crawl inside the box and sing a song? The old man laughed, and his long beard bobbed up and down. No, he said, you turn this handle here. The music comes out by itself. Isn't that miraculous? I'd like to hear that, cried Oscar. Do turn it, or may I try? Wait a while, said the old man. You'll soon see how it works. He stood up and pushed the barrel organ to the big gate, where people went in and out of the park. We'll play here, he said. I'll grind the organ, and you can sit beside me and hold the hat. That's far better than when the hat simply lies on the ground or on top of the barrel organ. The old man began turning the handle. Sure enough, the loveliest music came out of the box. That's almost like in our church at home on Sundays, cried Oscar. He would have liked to go dancing for joy all round the barrel organ, but he did want to help the old man, so he sat quietly on his hind legs and held the old hat in his mouth. Just look at that, sweet little dachshund, said the people. He must be a friend of the old man. One after another, they threw coins into the hat until it felt so heavy that Oscar could hardly hold it up. At last it grew quite dark. Mr. Barrel Organ Grinder, said Oscar in a loud yawn, I have traveled a long way today. I'm terribly tired and hungry. You're quite right, said the old man. It's late, and no more people will come now. It's time to go to sleep. Where was Oscar to sleep, and who was to give him something to eat? He didn't know anyone here. May I stay with you? He asked the old man. I will just come to your house with you and sleep in the kitchen. That's what I always do with my Master Willie. I haven't got a house or kitchen, answered the old man. I'm only a poor old barrel organ grinder. I sleep out here in the park on a seat. Just on the hard seat, asked Oscar in horror. But you have plenty of money now. Can't you get a hotel? You get good food in a hotel, and you can sleep in a lovely big bed. Oscar dear, said the old man, I have to save up for the winter. The winter is long and cold. I can't stand out in the street very long then, or I shall fall ill and die. No, Oscar did not want that to happen either, so they went through the dark park to the farthest seat, which stood under a tall lime tree. The old man spread a cover over the barrel organ. Then he opened his bag and pulled out a loaf of bread and a big sausage. Here, you have your share, he said to Oscar, and cut him a large piece of bread with his pocket knife, and gave him half the sausage. When they had finished eating, they went to a fountain and drank some water. Then they lay down on the seat. The old man spread out his long coat, and Oscar slipped under one corner of it too. Are you well covered up? Asked the barrel organ grinder after a while. Oscar did not answer. He was already sound asleep. Chapter 15. Oscar's Last Adventure. The sun was shining on the tops of the trees when Oscar woke up the next morning, and the little worker bees and big bumblebees were buzzing in the flowers of the lime tree overhead. He slipped out from under the warm coat, shook himself, and had a good stretch. "Good morning, Oscar," cried the old man, who was coming back from the fountain. "You certainly do sleep soundly. And how does the world seem to you this morning?" "I don't know," answered Oscar. "I'd like to look for the collar, but the city is so big." "You're right," the old man broke in. "The city is big, but a clever dachshund like you doesn't get lost as easily as all that. Here, catch." He gave Oscar a bit of bread, with dripping spread on it. "I have been thinking things over," went on the old man. "The best thing for you to do will be to spend a day wandering about the city. Perhaps you will meet the Pom, who has your collar. You can ask the other dogs whether they have seen anything. I will keep a lookout too. Lots of people come past here in the park with dogs. And if neither of us sees anything," asked Oscar. "If neither of us finds the Pom," said the barrel organ grinder, "then we will just have to think what to do next." "All right," said Oscar, and swallowed the last mouthful of his bread and dripping. "I'll set out on my search. I'll come back again at lunch time. Take good care when you cross the street," the barrel organ grinder called after him. "Look left and right every time." "Don't worry," Oscar shouted back. "I'll take care." He went out of the park into the wide street. "The white Pom must be somewhere," he thought. "He can't have disappeared off the face of the earth. I can't help finding him." Oscar began trotting through the big city. What a lot there was to see! Whatever direction he took, there were always more and more houses, and then still more after those. The streets were all as wide as the big marketplace at home. Where two streets crossed, there were posts on each corner with colored lights on them. When a red light showed, people stopped and waited until all the cars and trams and other vehicles had passed by. When the red light went out, there was a green light, and then the people hurried across to the other side. "My Master Willie ought to see that, too," thought Oscar, and trotted on. One shop after another lined the streets. These shops were far bigger than any Oscar had ever seen before, with huge windows made of nothing but glass, with hundreds of lovely things on show inside. There were bakers' shops, butchers' shops, shops with shoes, and shops with socks, coats, shirts, and jackets. Some shops sold cups, plates, pots, and pans. Some sold hammers, pliers, nails, and saws, and some sold nothing but toys. "Goodness gracious!" cried Oscar suddenly. In one shop behind big panes of glass there were even real motor cars. One of them was turning in circles all the time, like a roundabout. Oscar had no time to spend looking at all these marvels. He did not even stop in front of the shop where tortoises, parrots, and little monkeys were for sale. He thought only of one thing. He had to find the Pom, who was wearing his lovely red collar somewhere in the big city. There were plenty of dogs in this city. Some walked at the end of a lead, held by a man or a woman, but most of them were running around alone in the streets. There were wolfhounds, poodles, greyhounds, little Scotty dogs, bulldogs, and bristly fox terriers, and many others to which you could not easily put a name. But Oscar could not find one Pom. "Have you seen a white Pom with a red collar?" he asked again and again. But the dogs only sniffed all round him and did not answer. Oscar went on. Suddenly he saw a white dog coming round a corner. It was a Pom. Oscar's heart began to beat faster. He rushed across the street, and only just missed being run over by a car. "Wait, wait! Don't run away!" he shouted. "I've got to ask you something." The dog turned round, and Oscar could see at once that this was not the right Pom. He had nothing round his neck but a piece of old cord, with a round disc hanging from it by a rusty bit of wire. "Good morning," said Oscar. "I'm looking for a white Pom with a lovely red collar with golden studs on it. Have you got a collar like that at home by any chance?" The Pom laughed. "A red collar with golden studs? Ha ha ha! What do you take me for, a prince's lapdog? No, my master is a rag and bone collector, and I go round for him, looking for doors where people have put out old stuff that they don't want any more. In return, I get some thin soup and a bone every day, and sometimes a few blows into the bargain. Won't you come along too and help me?" "No, I can't do that," said Oscar. "I've got to look for my collar, and then I'd like to go back to my Master Willie." "Well, good luck to you, then," said the Pom, and went on his way. Oscar went on and on. Then he came upon a dachshund, sunning himself outside a garden gate. He was not able to help either. "There are plenty of white Poms about," he said, with a yawn, "but I have never seen one with a red collar, with golden stud and all." By now Oscar had gone a long way through the big city. He was growing tired and hungry. "The city is so big. How can I ever find the white Pom?" he thought. He went sadly back the way he had come. It was past lunchtime when he reached the park where he had spent the night. Just as he was going in through the gate to look for the barrel organ grinder, a fat man came down the path towards him, and beside him trotted a white Pom. Oscar stopped dead, and almost forgot to breathe in his excitement. There was no need to have a closer look. He could see from quite far away the Pom was wearing a red collar, and on the collar the midday sun was shining on golden stud after golden stud. There was no stopping Oscar now. He rushed up to the white Pom. "Here, you," he shouted. "You've got my collar. Give me back my collar." The Pom turned his head, and as soon as he saw the dachshund, he fled back into the park. "Pom, come here," the fat man ordered sharply. Oscar went up to him and sat up and begged. "Please, sir," he said, "your dog ought to give me that collar. It belongs to me. I love it, and I've been looking for it for such a long time. Please do give it back to me." "Rubbish! Leave me alone," scolded the man. He was about to walk on, but Oscar stood in his way. "It is my collar. It's a present from my Master Willie," he said. "He spent all his savings on it. Please, please give me back my collar." "What impudence! I'll teach you a lesson," shouted the man. "Pom, come here, seize him." He aimed a kick at the dachshund, but Oscar jumped nimbly to one side. At that instant the palm fell on him from behind, and sank his sharp teeth into his neck. Oscar yelped loudly, and tried to tear himself free. A fierce fight began. One moment the palm was on top, biting Oscar's neck and legs as hard as he could. The next moment Oscar wrenched himself free again, and rolled the palm over on the ground. "If only I could get the collar off him," thought Oscar. With a mighty swing he lifted the palm into the air, threw him on his back, and held him down on the gravel with both paws. Then he tried to undo the buckle with his teeth. Yes, it was coming. In another moment he would be able to run off with his collar. Then Oscar had to let go and sink down on the ground. The fat man had hit him across the back with his stick. Everything turned black before Oscar's eyes. Let go, you beast of a dachshund," bellowed the man. "Be off with you." He hit out again at the poor dachshund. Oscar tried his best to run away, but he could not move. "He has broken all my bones," he thought, and lay on the ground, panting aloud. Suddenly a loud voice shouted, "Stop that! What's going on here?" Who was this? Surely Oscar knew that voice. He turned his head and opened his eyes. It was the tall policeman. Beside the policeman stood the barrel organ grinder, with his long white beard. The fat man stood stock still for a moment, then he tucked his stick under his arm. "Here, Pom, come here," he called, and started to hurry away out of the park. "Stop!" cried the tall policeman once again. "Stay where you are." "What's the matter? Do you mean me?" asked the fat man. "I have not done anything. This wicked dachshund attacked my poor Pom, and tried to tear his collar off." "That is not true," said the barrel organ grinder. "I saw the whole thing right from the start. The man set the palm on the dachshund, and then began beating him. That is why I called you. If I had been a bit younger, I'd have taught him a good lesson. The ruffian! He must have taken that collar from the Lost Property Office, even though it belongs to Oscar." "What, the Lost Property Office?" squeaked the fat man. "I bought that collar, I tell you." "Hold your tongue, you old windbag, or I'll show you what for." At that the policeman grew quite stern. "Come along now to the Lost Property Office, all of you," he said. The fat man did not want to go. I have no time just now," he stammered. "I must see to something immediately." "Don't make excuses," said the policeman. "Come along, or I shall put the handcuffs on you here and now." The fat man said no more. Poor Oscar struggled to his feet, and they all went together to the building where the police station and the Lost Property Office were. When they went in, the man with the spectacles came to the little window. For a moment he looked very surprised. Then he said, "That's him all right. The man who claimed the red collar yesterday." He pointed to the fat man. "Take off your Pom's collar. the tall policeman told him sternly. The fat man put it down on the table in the middle of the room. With one bound, Oscar was up on the table and looking at the collar from every side. "It's my collar, it's my collar," he cried, barking for joy. "That's a wicked lie," the fat man protested. "The collar belongs to me. I bought it with my own money." "No, that isn't true," said Oscar. "It's mine. I know it perfectly well. Made of red leather, with a golden buckle and golden studs. That is exactly the same collar that my kind master Willie gave me for my birthday." The policeman paced up and down the room for a long time. Then he stopped and said, "My dear Oscar, I am very sorry, but I cannot help you. One of you says one thing, and the other says something else. How am I to know which of you is right? There is nothing else for it. We must keep the collar here. Perhaps we shall find someone else who can say for certain who it really belongs to." The fat man brought his fist down on the table with a crash. "This is disgusting," he stormed. "You take that miserable dachshund's word rather than mine. Give me the collar at once, or I will go to the mayor himself and complain." Suddenly Oscar jumped up. Look here a minute," he cried. "It says something inside." "Where?" asked the policeman. "I didn't see anything." Oscar pointed with his paw to the place on the inside of the collar. Sure enough, something was written there, very small, in blue ink. The policeman held the collar up close under his nose and read aloud, "With love to Oscar on his first birthday." Oscar leaped down from the table. You see," he cried, "it says Oscar inside." The fat man grew quite pale, and could not even speak. "There we are now. You are a liar and a thief," the tall policeman said sternly. "You claimed the collar from the Lost Property Office, although it doesn't belong to you at all. It's a good thing that Oscar looked at it properly. Most likely you have been up to other things besides this. Now you can go to prison for a while. You deserve that in any case, for nearly beating the dachshund to death." "No, please, not to prison," begged the fat man. "I don't want the collar any more anyway." "The collar goes to Oscar in any case," said the policeman. "What is more, you will pay him some compensation. He can use the money for his train journey home." Then he put the collar on Oscar and said, "What do you say, Oscar? The man will give you money for your ticket. I think there is a train leaving for Seven Towers in about an hour." Oscar was beside himself with joy. His bones were still aching from the beating, but in spite of that, he wagged his tail gaily, rushed in circles round the policeman and the barrel organ grinder, and shouted happily, "Hooray! I've got my collar back. Now I can go home to my master Willie. Hooray!" Chapter 16. Home at Last. The end of the story will not take long to tell. The policeman locked the bad fat man up in prison. Then they all went to the station together, the tall policeman and the barrel organ grinder, and Oscar between them, wearing his red collar. The train was ready and waiting at the station. The policeman soon bought the ticket, and with the rest of the money he got Oscar a sausage and a roll. "Mr. Guard," said the tall policeman, "this is our friend Oscar. He is going to Seven Towers. His home is there. Please, will you tell him where to get out? Here is his ticket." The old barrel organ grinder played a merry tune in farewell, And then Oscar left the big city. "Thank you, kind old man. Thank you, Mr. Policeman," he called through the window as the train drew out of the station. The sun had set, and it was dark by the time the train reached Seven Towers. Oscar ran all the way home from the station. You can imagine what it was like when he and his master Willie saw each other again. "Oscar, Oscar," cried Willie, with tears of joy shining in his eyes. "Where have you come from? Where have you been all this time? We looked for you everywhere." Oscar felt so happy that he was crying too. He said, "I lost my collar, and I wanted to go and find it. I couldn't have come home without my collar, could I? I went halfway round the world before I found it again in the end." "You silly old thing," said Willie, and hugged Oscar tightly. "Of course you could have come home without your collar. I have been so worried about you. I thought you must be dead." That evening Oscar was allowed to have supper at the table with Willie and all the family. He told them everything he had been through since his birthday, about the bad dogs, and about Lisa, how he went by train to Upchurch, and walked up to the mountain pastures with his tail bandaged up, about the overhead railway and the eagles, about the night in the dark coal cellar, and how the tall policeman and the barrel organ grinder had helped him in the big city, so that he got his collar back in the end. Of course he didn't forget the part about the two burglars either. When Oscar had finished his story, Willie still had hundreds more things he wanted to know, but his father said, "Children, tomorrow is another day. Oscar has earned a good night's sleep," so they all went to bed. For a long time afterwards, Oscar had to go on telling the story of his adventures over and over again. "I do wish I could be a dachshund too," said Willie. What lovely adventures you can have, and you are still only 1 year old. "You wait," Oscar comforted him. "Who knows what adventures you will have when you're grown up? I think it will be best if we go traveling together, so that we can take care of each other all the time. Don't you think so?" "Yes, we must do that," said Willie. "Well, go and see all the people who helped you on your travels, and who knows, one day the eagles might really come and see us in Seven Towers." "Yes, who knows?" Oscar yawned, curled himself up in his basket, and fell fast asleep.